you calling in from today. We're very happy to have you with us for our webinar, where we're going to explore the potential merger of DSpace and DSpace-CRIS, work that you have maybe heard about. And in today's session, we would like to give you a brief update on the work that we've done so far, and also answer questions that you may have about the potential merger of DSpace and DSpace-CRIS. My name is Holger Lenz. The second on the slide here, I'm the DSpace Program Coordinator, and I would also like to extend a warm welcome to the presenters today. The presenters are going to be Ianthe Sutherland. She is from the University of Edinburgh, and she is part of the leadership group of DSpace Governance. So welcome to Ianthe. Also a very warm welcome to Maureen Walsh, who is the chair of DSpace Governance. She's from the Ohio State University Libraries. And our third presenter will be Tim Donahue, our DSpace technical lead. So welcome to all of the presenters. Now, just a few housekeeping items before we get started that I'll share. Oh, before I go into the housekeeping, just a brief mention of the structure of the webinar. It's going to be 1 hour. After I share some housekeeping items, we're going to have an introduction by the governance chair, Maureen Walsh. Then Ianthe Sutherland will be sharing updates from the strategy planning group, followed by updates from the technology planning group given by Tim Donahue, and then we'll come to the question and answers part. And the question and answer part, sorry, can you just, yeah, thank you. The question and answer part will be based on the feedback form, and I will post the link to the feedback form in the chat here. You may have seen this in some of the messaging that has gone out around the merger. This here, the link that I just shared in the chat, is the official feedback form where you can add feedback, ask questions, and we've already had some submissions in that form, and we've weeded some of those questions and went through them, and we'll answer some of those questions that are in that form in today's session. And then, of course, also we'll have additional questions that you can ask live in the session today through the Zoom, the Q&A feature that Zoom provides. So also, these live Q&A questions will be answered by our panelists, and I would like to extend a warm welcome to them as well. Pascal Becker from the Library Code, Andrea Bolini from ForScience, and also Lieven Droogmans from Admire. So welcome to our panelists as well. Now, just a few housekeeping items. The chat function that you may be used to in Zoom has been disabled. So please only use the Q&A functionality. And you see in your taskbar on the bottom, there is that little icon that says Q&A. So if you click on that, you can use that to ask questions that we will then answer live. And if you have any comments, or if you have just any feedback or questions, please use that functionality since the chat has been disabled. Recording will be made available of the session afterwards, and the link to the slides will also be shared with the community after the session. So that's it from my part. Now I'm happy to hand it over to Maureen Walsh, who will give an introduction from DSpace Governance.
Thanks, Holger. Hello, as Holger mentioned, I'm Maureen Walsh. I'm the scholarly sharing strategist at the Ohio State University Libraries, and I'm the current chair of the DSpace leadership and steering groups. Thank you for joining us today to talk about the potential merger of DSpace and DSpace-CRIS. I would like to welcome you on behalf of DSpace Governance and provide a brief introduction as to why we are considering a potential merger of DSpace and DSpace-CRIS, and share a timeline of where we are. For many in the DSpace community, DSpace-CRIS needs no introduction, but others may be less familiar. DSpace-CRIS is an open source extension of DSpace built and maintained by ForScience, a DSpace Platinum registered service provider and a major contributor to the core DSpace codebase. Many members of the DSpace program and DSpace Governance are DSpace-CRIS users. Since DSpace adopted configurable entities in version 7, the use cases met by DSpace with entities enabled and DSpace-CRIS began to overlap significantly. When planning for DSpace 9, we saw this in the number of DSpace community requests for features that already existed in DSpace-CRIS. One result of this overlap is that desirable features developed for DSpace-CRIS must be ported to DSpace, an inefficient duplication of effort. With the potential merger, resources previously dedicated to the development, maintenance, and support of DSpace-CRIS would become available to DSpace. Next slide, please. While discussing plans for DSpace 9 in August of last year, as I mentioned previously, it became very clear there was a strong overlap in DSpace 9 feature requests and existing DSpace-CRIS features. As an outcome of the discussions in DSpace Governance around the overlap in DSpace 9 feature requests, the duplicated effort driven by the growing number of features since DSpace 7 that are ported between DSpace and DSpace-CRIS or built for both systems, and the overall use case overlap since DSpace 7, the DSpace Leadership Group approved the investigation of a potential merger of DSpace-CRIS into DSpace last October. To undertake this investigation, DSpace Steering charged 2 planning groups in January of this year, one focused on strategic issues related to a potential merger, and one to develop a technology roadmap for potentially combining the code bases. They began their work in February. Each planning group reports to DSpace Steering. Following the conclusion of the planning group's work, expected by the end of this calendar year, DSpace will then vote on whether to proceed or not with the merger of DSpace-CRIS into DSpace. In today's webinar, you will hear from both planning groups on where they are in their potential merger investigations, and you will have an opportunity to ask questions of a panel of DSpace and DSpace-CRIS technical experts. Thank you from DSpace Governance, and I will hand it over to Ianthe.
Okay, hi everyone. So I'm Ianthe Sutherland, like Holger said, from the University of Edinburgh, and I've been part of the strategy planning group, exploring at a strategic level if the potential merger between DSpace and DSpace-CRIS is feasible and sensible. Next slide, please. So we've been meeting roughly about twice a month to discuss the potential merger from a strategic, community, and governance perspective. The group is made up of a good mix of DSpace and DSpace-CRIS hosting institutions and service providers from DSpace, the leadership group, and has given varied perspective and insights, and we've had many interesting and lengthy discussions. Our purpose has been to make recommendations to DSpace steering group on how we could have a successful merger, making sure we address the needs of our wide group of stakeholders. We've been trying to make as clear a plan as possible, making sure it fits with our long-term vision for DSpace as well. Next slide, please. Now, our main key deliverable was a strategic vision document, which we've now done, which was approved by DSpace Steering on the 5th of August and shared publicly on the 12th of August. And for any of you who haven't read that yet, I would highly recommend it. We're quite proud of it, and you'll be able to view it after the webinar. We're now working on a recommendation document to present to steering and are hoping to have this completed very soon. We're reaching the end of that work. Next slide, please. Now, the strategic vision and purpose, I don't really want to read out the slide to you, but I've summarized the strategic vision document over the next few slides, and we'll read our vision for the potential merger. We want to create a unified, sustainable, and vibrant DSpace community for all the current users of DSpace and DSpace-CRIS. And it's really important that the unified DSpace would remain easy to use and flexible and satisfy the range of use cases that we have from DSpace and DSpace-CRIS. Importantly, we want to make sure that there's a straightforward upgrade path from existing repositories to the merged code base. Next slide, please. We identified, can we skip the slide, please? I think I took it out. There we go. So we identified that we feel what are the benefits and the opportunities of the potential merger, as well as the challenges and concerns. And we feel that the benefits and opportunities are strong, but of course we need to be aware of the challenges and mitigate those the best we can. Again, please come back and read these if you are interested after the webinar. Next slide, please. And finally, in conclusion, we feel that the potential merger embodies the DSpace program's commitment to open scholarship and the sustainability of DSpace. We feel that by uniting our code, communities, and vision, we build a much stronger solution. I'm now going to pass you on to Tim, who's going to talk to us about the technology planning group that's been meeting alongside the strategic planning group.
Thank you, Ayanti. Yeah, so I'm going to talk a little bit more about the technology planning group updates. I will admit ours are not quite as far along as the strategic planning group in terms of the updates we're ready to share, but I can give you a sense of what we've talked about so far and where we're thinking things will be going next. So similar to the strategic planning group, we began our work in February. We're meeting once every 2 weeks. We are made up from a diverse set of members as well. We have 5 institutions that use either DSpace or DSpace-CRIS with a mixture of both, as well as 4 different service providers who support either DSpace or DSpace-CRIS or both. Our main purpose is to make recommendations to the steering group around a strategy for potentially merging the 2 products. With an eye towards long-term maintainability, scalability, and alignment with our community needs. And really the overall goal is to balance the efficiency of such a merger with opportunities for learning and engagement that would be required out of the committers and our developers to allow people to learn the code bases as a merger would occur. From there, our key deliverables, our main one is not yet complete yet in terms of the technical strategy document. I'm going to get to some of the key points we're working on there yet. But we did develop a DSpace-CRIS and DSpace differences wiki page, which describes all of the architectural and feature differences between these 2 products. So these are literally the things that would have to get merged from DSpace-CRIS into DSpace for the merger to be complete. So that wiki page is already up there. You can access that if you haven't already, or look at it after our session today. We are in progress, though, with the technical strategy document, and this is where we'll have our actual recommendations to steering and leadership to allow them to decide whether to approve the merger. And this will include a timeline and a roadmap and everything you'd expect out of sort of a strategy for merger. I'm not going to be able to share the details of that document yet since it's still in progress, but I will give you a couple key highlights here in just a moment. But before I get to that, I did want to note a few of the key things that come out of the DSpace-CRIS and DSpace differences wiki page, just to summarize this at a higher level. Again, all the details are on the wiki, and you're welcome to take a look at them in your own time. But I want to stress a few things that are sometimes misunderstood about what is truly different these days between DSpace-CRIS and DSpace, and what is actually the same or similar between the 2 systems. So in terms of an architectural level, DSpace-CRIS uses the same entities now as DSpace, but there's a couple key differences in how those entities are structured and used. First and foremost, configurable entities are on by default in DSpace-CRIS, and there are some additional entities provided. But the key differences in architecture are really around how relationships are managed between entities. They're stored differently within the DSpace-CRIS system, where they're stored more like metadata using the authority framework that's already built into DSpace. Whereas DSpace, when it has relationships between entities, stores them within a database table to manage those relationships between those individual objects. And this does mean that the virtual metadata, which is sharing metadata between entities that exists within DSpace, it acts a little bit different between the 2 systems. In DSpace, that virtual metadata really is virtual, and it's pulled dynamically across that relationship at the database layer. But DSpace-CRIS will store that metadata alongside the regular metadata and update it on a regular basis when the objects are changed. But really, as you can see, there's a lot of similarities with how entities actually work between the 2 systems. There are a couple key differences here with regards to relationships that we have to deal with in terms of these discussions. And I did want to highlight that on the feature side of things, DSpace-CRIS does have a number of new features related to entities, and some of those are listed here. But there's also a large number of features that are not directly related to entities, which we think could be quite useful to general DSpace users out there in the world, just in general. But in terms of things that are related to entities, there are more things around authors managing content and group submissions and managing your researcher profiles via granular security permissions. But there's a large number, as I mentioned, of features that are not related to entities, including things like more advanced statistical reports, including being able to export those reports, better multilingual support in the user interface, editing static content from the user interface, from the admin interface, and even this basic nested or hierarchical metadata. I'm not going to go through the full list of all these differences. This is really a snapshot. There's approximately 20-ish differences between the two products that are listed in that full feature differences list on the wiki. You can take a look at those in your own time. Some are larger than others. These are more the larger changes that are more larger differences between the two products. But there's a large number on that page of very tiny things that are slightly different between the two products. And from there, I'm going to shift a little bit to what we're discussing within the technology planning group around what a merged product might look like in our opinion. These ideas are not formalized yet, but these are things that will likely go into our strategy document as we're working to finish that up. But we do have general agreement that a merged product would be a unified product still named DSpace. So the name DSpace-CRIS would no longer exist. It would be retired once the merger is complete. It'd be a product that enhances and not replaces current DSpace, retaining the features of both of the current products as much as we possibly can. And we'd want to make it configurable so you can make it behave more like current DSpace if you want a system that acts more like current DSpace, or you could make it behave more like current DSpace-CRIS, or have it somewhere in between where you can choose exactly which features you want to enable or disable based on your own user needs and use cases. Additionally, we've been talking about how might a potential merger be achieved. And again, these are early ideas, but we do have some general agreement around how the merger process or what would be required for the merger process to be successful. And so in our opinion right now, we're talking about that the merger process would require a series of pull requests that would come from DSpace-CRIS into DSpace. And this gives developers more of an opportunity to better understand and learn the code in a piecemeal basis, little by little. And it will also allow us to just understand each of the features a little bit better as they come into to DSpace. But because they'd be a series of pull requests, we want to make sure we have a schedule or a timeline for those pull requests to ensure they are being created in a timely manner and being reviewed quickly. And in order to review things quickly, we'd really need to establish a pool of reviewers and testers to help us keep to that schedule. Overall, though, we think this would not be really possible within one major release of DSpace. There's a lot of changes that would need to happen here and a lot of code to pull over and pull requests. So it's likely to occur over two major releases. So it could be starting in 10 and ending in 11, or starting in 11 and ending in 12. With the idea here being that each release would add a subset of those features coming from DSpace-CRIS into DSpace. So we complete it over basically a 2-year period, since we have major releases once a year. But again, all these ideas are not yet finalized. You'll see the final recommendations out of the report once it is made public. But first, it'll go to steering and leadership for their approval and final decision. And from there, I am going to shift gears now. That's our updates from the two planning groups. I'm going to shift gears, and I'm going to start out by answering the pre-submitted questions. As Holger mentioned at the beginning here, the questions that I'm going to answer here first were all submitted via the public feedback form. We did not answer every single question individually. Instead, we summarized them. There were a lot of similarities between those questions, a lot of ideas and concepts that overlapped. So we summarized them into, I think there's 8 questions here coming up that I'll talk through. But after answering these pre-submitted questions, that's where we will open up the floor to answer your questions here today. And I'll be joined by Andrea, Levin, and Pascal in answering today's questions as well. So as I'm going through this, if you have if any of these bring up additional thoughts or additional questions, you're welcome to already start to add them into our Q&A feature here in Zoom. So we're ready to go once we finish this up, and we can open the floor up and answer your questions more directly. So these are the ones that are asked previously. So I'm going to just go question by question here. So we had several people asking, when is a merged product coming? Some wanting it as soon as possible, all that sort of stuff. As implied by the previous slides, the timeline is really uncertain as of today. So we need to make a merger decision first. That needs to be made by steering and leadership based on the outputs of our two planning groups. And if approved, the current plan, as I alluded to already, would likely be to do this merger over two major releases. So that definitely means this isn't coming soon. It's not going to come in 10.0, which will be out next year, but there is the possibility that we'd start some of the merger activities in 10.0, and it could be completed by the 11.0 release in 2027. But that really is uncertain until the merger decision is made. We do not have a timeline that we can share, but we will obviously work to share a public timeline as soon as we are able to do so, and once a decision is finally made on the process going forward. The next question we received previously was, is this a major rebuild or a major code refactor of DSpace? And the implication here was, is this as big as the DSpace 7 rebuild or major code refactoring that occurred between DSpace 6 and 7? And the answer here is no. This is not going to require a rebuild of DSpace. It's not going to require significant code refactors to DSpace. As I alluded to, DSpace and DSpace-CRIS are very similar systems. They're more similar than they've ever been before. They use the same front end and back end. And in many ways, DSpace-CRIS is really just like DSpace with entities enabled and a lot of extra features. And I showed you some of those in an earlier slide. So really, when we're talking about this merger, this would really be a matter of taking features out of DSpace-CRIS and pulling them into DSpace little by little, as we mentioned, over two releases. So it'd be very similar to just merging new features into DSpace, a larger number of new features into DSpace, I should say, but still, it's just bringing new features into DSpace from DSpace-CRIS. Another question we had was, how difficult would the upgrade be to such a merged product? Would this be like the DSpace 6 to 7 upgrade? So this is similar to that last question. The answer is no. We do not think this upgrade would be as complex as that upgrade from 6 to 7. It'd be much more similar to upgrading from 7 to 8 or from 8 to 9. So it would be a major upgrade, but it would be an upgrade that is more similar to those more recent upgrades. And as mentioned, it would likely be achieved over two releases. So you might get some of the DSpace-CRIS features in one major release, and the rest of them would come in the next major release. We also had this question, if I currently use DSpace, will I be able to use this merged product in the same way? Yes, you would. The goal here is to allow institutions to decide which features you want to enable or disable in the merged product. So that does mean if you're an existing DSpace user and you don't want any of the DSpace-CRIS stuff, you could leave them turned off. And in fact, they'd be turned off by default. We'd provide more of an out-of-the-box look and feel that's more similar to DSpace. But for those who are coming from DSpace-CRIS, you'd have the ability to turn those features on that you want that used to be DSpace-CRIS features in order to make them enable to make the system act more like DSpace-CRIS. And if you wanted something in between, you would also have that capability to be able to pick and choose which features are most important to you and your users. How does this merger impact ongoing community development or ongoing pull requests? And this is a very good question. It's something we've talked about a lot within the technical planning group because we don't want that impact to occur. And our goal, in fact, is to avoid any negative impacts on ongoing community contributions. So even if the merger is approved, we would still be accepting community contributions in parallel to the merger activities. But in parentheses, I note down here, one of the challenges we're trying to work out right now, we're brainstorming around, is we do have a limited set of code reviewers and testers at this point in time. We have been brainstorming ways to try and expand that pool of reviewers within the technology planning group. I don't have anything I can announce here today, but we're aware of the problem of the review process. We want to find ways to speed it up and also allow this in parallel contribution of community contributions in parallel to merger contributions. We do have some ideas around that, and I hope that we'll be able to find ways to mitigate this issue going forward into the merger process. If features are different, how will they be unified? And this is really about the fact that there are some features that are similar but implemented differently in DSpace and DSpace-CRIS. But I will note it's a small number. It's a very a small subset of the features differences within DSpace and DSpace-CRIS. Our overall plan here is to analyze these individually and decide a strategy on a case-by-case basis. And this really can be enabled by that fact of merging over a series of pull requests so that we can have that flexibility to say, okay, this feature needs to be merged in this particular way, this one maybe a different way. In some cases, maybe we'd take an implementation more from the DSpace-CRIS side. In other cases, maybe we just leave it how it is in DSpace and enhance it. It really depends on a case-by-case basis with each of these sort of features that are very slightly different. But I will note this is a small number of the overarching features and those differences, but you can look at the wiki page for more information about where those differences exist.
Tim, may I add to this?
If you want to, real quick, Pascal, just be
Really
quick
quick.
about it. Yep.
Even if we look at two features and have to decide what to go by, we will for sure have in mind that people are using one or the other feature, and we will look out for solutions that maybe even enable both solutions to work out by configuration or something. That's not a promise, but it's something we have in mind that people are using these things. So don't be afraid that we will cut off your very important feature. That's something we will take care for and see what we can achieve. But that has to be looked on the features if we can achieve two solutions and how much effort it would need or not.
Yes, agreed. And I would say it's kind of around the use cases as well. So we want to make sure that your use cases are met. Whether it'll be the exact same feature may be under discussion still, but as Pascal noted, we might find ways to configure it based on what our understandings of the use cases are around these two features or similar features. So there's a lot that's possible here, but I would also stress here the series of pull requests merger scenario, the strategy there will also allow the developer community and those using these features a chance to offer your feedback. So as you see these features getting pulled over, you can provide feedback if we haven't met your use case entirely. If we've missed something along the way, that gives us an opportunity to make sure we get it addressed. Because the overall goal here is to not pull use cases out of either of these two systems, but to allow you to still meet your use cases and needs. So moving along here. Will this merger negatively impact performance or the maintenance of DSpace? Does it add technical debt? And this came up from a couple people within the questions that were submitted before. I again think this will be alleviated by the series of pull requests merger scenario or strategy. The reason why is because merging things as a series of pull requests allows us to analyze each of these features as it comes into DSpace to ensure that we are not adding technical debt or negatively impacting performance. That is our overall goal here. We're not trying to grow DSpace into something that is massively large and difficult to maintain. And in fact, steering does have a longer term goal of modularizing DSpace that I want to mention here to allow flexibility within the DSpace product and allow it to support additional use cases. The overall goal that steering has established is to allow DSpace to have a smaller core with optional modules to allow it to be extended. In my opinion, this merger would be an initial step in that direction. It will not fully modularize DSpace to the extent that we'd like to do so, but it allows us to start to think in that scenario in a much clearer pattern because we'll be able to see this piece of code within DSpace-CRIS is a logical module. We can modularize this and pull this out to make it more optional for users who need it, but not everybody who may not necessarily want it. So there are opportunities here within this merger. But this is definitely a goal that we have in mind within the technology planning group is to ensure that we are not adding that technical debt and that we are keeping performance and long-term maintenance in mind at all times. And finally, this came up, and I thought I'd address this one last because I can also give the panelists an opportunity to talk about this from your opinion. Would a merger create an unfair competitive advantage for Science as one of our many service providers? So I'm going to answer this from my perspective, and this is the last of the pre-submitted questions, and we'll move into the open questions in a moment. And I will ask the panelists if they want to add anything to this. In my opinion, though, I do not think this creates a competitive advantage because we are working in a collaborative way. This is a collaborative effort. We have 3 other service providers on the technical planning group discussions, and 2 of them are here today with us, and Lieven and Pascal. And while it is accurate that Forest Science knows DSpace-CRIS best, we do have other service providers who already do have experience with DSpace-CRIS, so they're not the only ones that know DSpace-CRIS. And again, I feel like our strategy for merging things via a series of pull requests can help out here and be beneficial here because it allows the service providers and developers in general to better learn DSpace-CRIS in a piece-by-piece basis by reviewing the code, by testing the pull requests as they're coming in. So that is my opinion here, but I will go ahead and open it up to the other providers here if anybody wants to comment on this one. As I mentioned, this is the last of our pre-submitted questions, and then we'll shift into the open questions area. So I don't know if I know I'm putting all 3 of you on the spot, but if Pascal, Lieven, or Andrea, if any of you want to add anything to this, you're welcome to do so. But I'll just pause here briefly. I mean, if you don't, that's okay as well. Okay. Oh, I see Andrea put a hand up. Andrea, would you like to add something to it?
Yeah, I would like to rephrase a bit the question, maybe. I see a
Go right ahead.
competitive advantage for DSpace and for the DSpace community as a result of this merge. The competitive advantage is that we expect DSpace, the resulting of the merge, to be in a better position compared to commercial product. So yes, I expect a competitive advantage for anyone in the DSpace community that will have a product more ready and more updated with the need of the market and what, unfortunately, commercial products already provide.
Okay. Thank you for that. Okay, so then I think I'm going to move to the open Q&A here then and give us an opportunity to talk with those in attendance. As noted here, we got Pascal from the library code, we got Andrea from Forest Science, and Lieven from Admire, who can help me in answering these questions, but I will also be available to answer your questions that you may have, and you can keep adding them into the Q&A feature in the chat here. I did want to note we do have a link to the slides immediately here at the bottom, so I will leave this slide up while we're answering questions. You can go to this link immediately and you'll have access to our slide deck. This will also be sent out after the session along with the video. But if you wanted to take a look at the slide deck while you're forming questions in your head, you're welcome to do so. And I might need, Holger, I think I might need your help here. I'm trying to get the Q&A feature up here on my end. If you want to ask some questions to us, we can answer them.
Absolutely. And I just wanted to share 2 other pieces of information briefly. First of all, if you have questions that you would like to have answered live in this session, please use the Q&A feature here in Zoom. I know I posted the link to the Tally feedback form earlier, and you're welcome to post questions there later on, but we're not going to be able to answer questions that are posted right now in this Tally form live in this session. So if you would like to have your questions answered live in this session, then please use the Q&A feature that you have here in Zoom. The other thing I wanted to share with you, because I noticed it wasn't in the slides, it's a link to our 2 planning groups, the strategy planning group and the technology planning group. Because the notes of those planning groups are public. So if you would like to dig deeper into the work of the planning groups, you're welcome to do so and take a look at those. And I just wanted to share that because I noticed that wasn't in the slides. So let's now move into our questions that were posted here in the Q&A feature. And I'm just going to go ahead and read out the questions. And then Tim or Lieven, Pascal, Andrea, please feel free and you're welcome to unmute yourself to answer the questions here. So the first question, it may have already been answered. I'll read it out again just to make sure. It says, will the result of the merge process be a merger of both solutions or rather an integration of the CRIS-only features into DSpace code base? I'm wondering, as Mrs. Walsh mentioned, a merger of DSpace-CRIS into DSpace. That's the question.
Yeah, I think we already answered that, but to clarify, it's more of the latter. We're basically pulling features out from DSpace-CRIS into DSpace, but the overall goal is that you have a feature complete or a use case complete DSpace that can meet the needs that both current DSpace meets as well as current DSpace-CRIS meets. So the goal here is really to bring both products together, but we will do it PR by PR, which pulls sort of groups of features over little by little from DSpace-CRIS into DSpace. And I see Pascal has a hand raised as well to add to that.
I would like to make a general statement here for all the questions we had so far and all that they are coming. I think people must be aware that DSpace and DSpace-CRIS are pretty close to each other already. DSpace-CRIS includes everything that DSpace has and adds more to it. And the general idea is to get this over into DSpace and to continue to not have two source bases that we are maintaining, but to have one common source base that we are maintaining. So this is important to understand for this question, because there is no big difference in one way or the other. The general idea is to have everything together in one code base. There's also a question that's coming up later about the governance. And I think there must be an understanding that all the DSpace-CRIS users I talk to feel like being a part of DSpace. Being a chair of the German DSpace consortium, we have a lot of members in the German DSpace consortiums that are members of DSpace via the consortium that just use DSpace-CRIS. We also have a lot of members that just use DSpace, but the feeling is that we already have a united community where we have to see how we use the capacities we have to maintain the source code the best. And that's why we are talking about the merger. So all these questions that are going into the feeling of having different communities, or that we have two products that are not close to each other, are something I feel a bit strange about, because that's not how I anticipate the current situation.
Good point, Pascal. Yes, I can verify. Yeah, the two products, as I mentioned earlier in the slide deck, are closer than they've ever been. They have the same front end, back end, all that sort of stuff. But I think to Pascal's point, it is accurate that DSpace-CRIS includes everything that is within DSpace, and then it layers other features on top of it. So that it is really a matter of pulling those things that are unique to DSpace-CRIS over into DSpace, as we said, PR by PR. Andrea, you have something to add to that?
Yeah, I would like to take the chance to use this question to also clarify that it's not only DSpace that will be beneficial of the merger. It's not only to give new feature to DSpace from DSpace-CRIS.
Mm-hmm.
The reason why we are discussing the merger from the DSpace-CRIS perspective is because we want to become stronger together and have a long plan to go far. So we are in a unique position now after 20 years of history, because DSpace-CRIS is close to 20 years of history. The two code base was never so closer than before. And the challenge that we face is that we know that we need to make improvement. And they are the same that the governance has identified for DSpace in general. So we want to go for modularization and to have a better system. And the risk without merge is that the community will diverge again. So we need to make the merger now to have a better plan together after the merge. So the merger is not the end, but it is the new start for a better DSpace altogether.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying, Andrea.
Okay. Move on to the next question. The next question is really two questions, so I'll start with the first question, and then we'll do the second question. So the first question of that question is: the entity models in DSpace and DSpace-CRIS differ fundamentally, especially in how relationships between entities are represented and in the configurability of front-end components. Will both approaches survive the merger, or will there be only one variant?
Yeah, we might answer these somewhat together here. The second part is, what does this mean for DSpace instances now upgrading to DSpace 7? Yeah, so I'll start with this, but I'll open it up to others as well. Essentially, yes. As I mentioned, the fundamental difference is in how relationships are stored between entities, but the entity model itself is identical. It's just the relationships between them. And they also mentioned the configurability of front-end components, which is something I alluded to as a difference in features. The goal here is to bring all the features that exist in DSpace-CRIS over into DSpace. So configurability of front-end components would come over into DSpace. With regards to the relationships model, we're seeing this as a two-staged approach. I didn't go into the details of this because this gets a little bit more technical, but I'll go somewhat into the details here now. But we see it as a two-stage approach, and this is part of the reason behind the doing the merger over the two major releases. It's part of the benefit of that, is that in the first major release where this merger begins, we would most likely have both relationship models in place. There'd be the DSpace-CRIS relationship model and the DSpace one. There'd be two side by side, and you would choose one based on whether you wanted your system to work more like DSpace-CRIS, in which case you use the DSpace-CRIS one, or if you wanted to work more like DSpace, in which case you use the DSpace one. That is not sustainable long term, which is why we want to do that second major release to kind of add the additional features we haven't added already, but also to merge that relationships model into one model to go forward. And the reason for that over two releases is because we don't have a perfect relationship model yet. We've talked about this pretty extensively, both in the technology planning group meeting as well as outside of that as well. The DSpace relationship model has flaws, and the DSpace-CRIS relationship model has flaws. They both have different types of benefits and different types of flaws. So we are really looking towards, can we build a better model that will meet both use cases and not have those same flaws that we see in each of those models. So the goal of that second major release would be to have a merged, combined relationship model that would meet the use cases both of DSpace-CRIS and of DSpace, the features coming from either of those. That would likely require some sort of automated migration for people of their database to the new model. But we think that likely can be in a more automated fashion, so it shouldn't be anything significant. Again, this is just the relationship model. It is not the overarching entities themselves. But that's the overall goal here, is that temporarily we might have both types of relationships in the first release, but they will go away and become one. But your overarching question here is that what does this mean for DSpace instances that are just now upgrading? Honestly, it doesn't mean anything specific other than eventually we may have a migration script to change relationships from one storage layer to a different storage layer. But I expect that to be more at like an automated database level migration script if possible. Otherwise, there'll be an automated script that we'd run for you to make that migration happen. So it's not going to be anything significant or damage your ability to use DSpace 7 as it is, or DSpace 8 or DSpace 9 or DSpace-CRIS. Any of those will be supported. So I'll stop talking there. I see Pascal has a hand raised here to add to this.
I think also this is something, so what Tim just said at the end, something we could emphasize and generalize a bit. We are aware that a lot of users are using DSpace or DSpace-CRIS or even both in some institutions. And we are aware that all of these are looking about how the merger will affect them and what the merger will mean to them. And of course, we are aware that if people are just upgrading to DSpace 7 entities, they are asking what does it mean for DSpace 9 or 10 or 11 or 12 and how much work will come to us. But be assured that if any migration is necessary, we will try to find a way to make it as easy as possible and as automated as possible for you. Since I think DSpace 5 now, we have automatic database updates in place in DSpace. So we are able to automate also these migrations. We did this in the past, we are able here. It is not at all comparable to what we all went through when migrating to DSpace 7, 8, or 9 with a new UI, where all the new UI had to be redone. This is something here is working in the back end that you probably will not have to touch at all yourself, where we will probably provide, or for sure provide, scripts and automation to do these things for you. And this, so to generalize this is the case for the relationships, but this is also something we are looking out for configuration or for features that we will be merging or for things that will not continue in one or the other product as they are currently right now. We will look out for ways to support all the use cases we can identify. We will look out for places where we can make things configurable to support both ways if possible. We will look out to keep this as minimal for you as possible. At the same time, of course, it will be a migration to a new major DSpace release, as you will have to do it anyway. The DSpace community supports the last 3 major releases with security updates, and we really suggest you to update at least every 2.5 years to stay in that window. That is something you have to do anyway, and with every major upgrade, things come where you will have to run the migration scripts we provide. So this should be something you should be able to handle pretty well, hopefully. And this is something where we will try to make a lot of effort so that you don't have to make a lot of effort.
Yep, exactly. So it's what I mentioned earlier on. We're trying to make sure that this is an upgrade that is much more like going from 7 to 8 or from 8 to 9. We're not doing anything crazy here that's going to require you to do a lot of heavy lifting on your end. So we'll do the heavy lifting for you in this sort of thing. So I think that's it for that one, unless anybody else has anything else to add to that. Because I see we have a lot of questions here and about a little less than 15 minutes to go.
Yeah, let's go ahead and move on to the next question. Of course, we can always come back to this if we need to later on. But the next question is, what are ideas regarding the governance model after a merger? Would the DSpace governance model resume, thus with community participation in major decisions on platform development?
Yeah, I'll answer this very quickly. Maureen's not here to answer. She had to leave a little bit early, but the governance model will not change and it will resume as is. As Pascal mentioned earlier, there are actually people in DSpace Governance who use DSpace-CRIS. So we already have DSpace-CRIS people represented in our governance. They also are members at times as well. So the goal here is really, if this merger occurs, then that pulls them even more into the fold. So now we're all just one community. We already are practically one community, but we can pull even more of them into the governance model as well as membership. So it's really simple. It doesn't change.
Yeah. Okay, I think we can move on to the next question. Is a new CRIS release based on DSpace 9 going to come out soon?
And I'll give this to Andrea, I think, because I don't know the answer to that.
Oh, yes. Yes, the new release is expected in October. It's noted on the wiki page in the roadmap. It will be aligned with DSpace 9, with the latest release. And we have also completed the migration of the documentation from the PDF that was usually published as a release artifact on GitHub in wiki page on the Lyrasis wiki into the DSpace-CRIS space. This will be the first release that have the documentation on the wiki page. The reason why we postpone a bit the release is also because, yes, we are talking about merge. The merge need to be still approved, but let's clarify that the two community are working together since 20 years. So we are continuously moving feature from DSpace to DSpace-CRIS. And for instance, one of the major feature for in DSpace-CRIS is already a pull request for DSpace is the audit framework. And we were waiting to finalize the last change to the audit framework that was proposed first for DSpace, then DSpace-CRIS, to tag the new release of DSpace-CRIS. It's just to keep the two products aligned.
All right, thank you, Andrea. Okay, next question is, how do you envision splitting the features between the two releases if the merge is divided this way? Doesn't this risk leaving the first release incomplete?
Oh yeah, in terms of doing it over 2 major releases. So I can cover this first, and I'd welcome others to chime in here as well. So the features, we want to. I can't exactly detail how the features are split here today because that's still under discussion. But the overarching idea here is that it needs to be done over 2 releases for a couple reasons. I mentioned one, which is the relationship model we need to look at more directly to understand how to bring that together to meet both use cases, but also um, merging things PR by PR has a lot of great benefits, as I mentioned, allowing us to learn the code better, to avoid things uh, issues with performance or just older code or anything like that. We can get all that stuff cleaned up along the way. But one of the things that we're aware of is that doing it PR by PR is going to be a little bit slower. And that's okay, in my opinion. It allows us to learn. It allows us to bring this code over and clean it up as it comes in to DSpace to ensure we have a better system together that we can all work on and feel comfortable with. But as you noted, because of this, one of the downside is that the risk is that the first release may not be feature complete from a DSpace-CRIS perspective. It'll still be feature complete from a DSpace perspective, and it'll add a lot of new features to DSpace. It'll allow DSpace users to have capability of DSpace-CRIS features right away. And it might even allow some DSpace-CRIS users to upgrade into it, as long as the features they most rely on are there. But we are aware that that first release may not be feature complete from a DSpace-CRIS perspective, but as Pascal noted, we support the last 3 releases on the DSpace side, so you don't have to upgrade immediately if you don't want to. That's one option for you. We have many users that that stay on 7 for a long time. Like on DSpace 7, a lot of people are on 7 right now. They might be going right to 9. They skip over 8. In this sort of case, if the merger started with 10 and ended with 11, you could skip 10 and go right to 11. That is totally up to you. It is how you want to structure your upgrade process. So if the one release is less complete from your perspective, you don't have to use that release. You're welcome to wait until the next one comes out. But we're more structuring it this way, as I mentioned, to allow us the time to do this right and not cause more chaos by trying to do things too quickly. But that's my perspective. I'd allow others to add to that if you want to.
Yeah, I think I just also want to add, like, this is the current state of thinking in the planning groups, right? So this will still be reviewed by steering and leadership. So all of these questions will be taken into consideration at that point and will be weighed and see, what steering will recommend and leadership as the best solution forward. The other point I also wanted to mention in relation to this is that I think one of the main reasons also for doing it over 2 releases is to not have a very long release schedule for DSpace 10, for example, and extend it with a significant amount of time that is unclear at the starting point, and get into a scenario where releases and release timelines would not be predictable. And given what Tim said, like, there are no major risks for a regular DSpace user, and for a DSpace-CRIS user, they can just see like how valuable certain features are and whether or not they already want to upgrade to 10 or want to wait one more release. But they will also have no issues because they will still be on a community supported version, DSpace-CRIS. So this, I think, clarifies the current thinking.
Yep. Thank you, Levin.
Very good. Thank you. Okay, moving on to our next question. How will DSpace communicate to new institutions whether they should adopt DSpace or DSpace-CRIS during the merge phase?
I think that's a good question. It's one we need to also talk about within governance. In my opinion, though, on this, and I'd welcome others to chime in here, we would be recommending new institutions to go to using DSpace. Because the name DSpace-CRIS is going to go away eventually. It will all become one product, DSpace. And so if you can use DSpace, you should use that. If for some reason, if you're in that first major release and it's doesn't have everything you want, but DSpace-CRIS does, then you're welcome to still use DSpace-CRIS. But our goal is to try and get everybody under one umbrella and using one product, and that's DSpace. So that would be our primary recommendation to anybody who's brand new coming into this community. But Andrea, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I just want to make a general recommendation. is go with community in any case. Don't go alone. So if you are okay with the space, it's perfectly fine. We are happy. The space 10 in the scenario where we go for two release, uh, the idea is to give as much as feature as possible to enlarge the use case supported out of box. If you really need something in DSpace-CRIS, much better look to DSpace-CRIS instead and go alone and make your own customization, maintain your own system, go for anything proprietary. So stay with the community, share with other, let's follow the path.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, stay with one of the two communities before doing it yourself.
Okay, very good. Thank you. The next question is, current issues will also be merged or addressed before merging? Question mark. So I think it's will
Oh, it looks
current
like
issues.
issue tickets. Yeah, it looks like it's
Yeah.
bug tickets or issue tickets. That's a good point to bring up. I don't think they're all going to be addressed before merger because I know, speaking from experience in the DSpace issue ticket system, there's things in there that are very old that we go through and clean them up every once in a while. And I'm sure that the Force Science has the same thing. They've been around for a very long time as well. But I think I'd probably recommend we try and move things over as much as possible, but we might need to go through and comb out which things are newer issues versus older issues. But I'd welcome others to add to this because I don't have a good solution to this now, but it's great to bring this up. Pascal, I see you have your hand raised first, and then Andrea.
I think it's a good point to have in mind, but it's nothing we need to address now and right now. We first have to make the decision if the merger is coming. We have to decide how the merger is coming. And once we know this, we can always take a look on the issues if they are still there. And if they are there, we should move them on. But that's a minor detail question for me, honestly.
Makes sense.
And
Andrea, you want to add?
with regard
Go
to
ahead.
the time, I think we should continue fast with the last two questions.
Okay. Andrea, do
Yeah,
you have something quick to
I
add?
just want to, of course, there is something that related to the hygiene of the software, as Tim mentioned. So there are issues that just need to be cleaned up. There is some spam for sure. But there are also issues that need to be right target, because in many cases issue was identified on the space component by the space CRIS user, and we need to check if these issues are present also into the space bug system, or we need to move. But the other point is we have a lot of new feature requests on GitHub. And the answer for that is we will try to avoid as much as possible to implement that during the merger, honestly. So the goal is we don't want to make major change during the merge, because we need to have stable code base during the merge of the two product. So yes, you can still expect some improvement where they are minimal, but no big new feature or architectural change. It is one of the discussion in the merger group, but we already have an agreement that this should be avoided.
Okay.
Okay, and we only have 2 minutes or a minute and a half left here. So we have one more. Go
I'm going to
ahead, Tim.
recommend we skip the next one. Please
Mhm.
go into more detail about benefits and flaws of the entity models. That is very difficult to go into detail. The entity models are very similar. Like I mentioned, the only difference is the relationship model. And it's really just a matter of that there are certain paths for gathering the relationships that can be performance heavy on DSpace side and performance heavy on DSpace-CRIS side. And they're different ways that they become more performance heavy, where the performance becomes not as good. And so that's why we want to look at that relationship model more closely to try and avoid those performance issues on either side. But it's sort of interesting right now to us that different areas have different performance issues. But I'm not going to go into that. I can't go into that in more detail right now. It's too difficult to do. Do you recommend waiting for the merger announcement to adopt entities? No, I do not recommend waiting to adopt entities if you want to use entities right now. The merger does not really impact how entities work. And as we mentioned, if we change any of the underlying like relationship model for entities, we'll have an automated way to allow you to migrate your things forward. So entities can be adopted at any time. There's no reason to wait. If you need them already, you should use them, whether that's at the DSpace level or even in DSpace-CRIS based on what your needs are for entities. I would recommend using them rather than waiting much longer. But I'd welcome any last comments on that. And I see the last thing is just a thanks. We're right at the top of the
Well,
hour.
we are at the top of the hour. So
There's
see
one question
Pascal.
that I answered in writing, just because I noticed we will run out of time, but that's also in the FAQ section somewhere.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we'll do our best to integrate the answers to the questions in our slide deck as well. Pull out some of those and add those so that the questions will be addressed as well for you in writing. But you have the link to the slide deck. Since we're at the top of the hour, thank you all who attended. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to the presenters. And stay tuned as there will be more communication put on the Google group and the Slack channel for DSpace around the merger. But thank you all for attending, and I wish you a great rest of your day.
Yep. Thank you all.